A team of archaeologists just published evidence that they've mapped an entire ancient megacity buried under the Iraqi desert, without digging, using quantum-sensitive instruments that can detect the magnetic signature of bricks fired 2,300 years ago. And the city they found? It might rewrite how we think about ancient global trade. So there's this site in southern Iraq called Jebel Khayyaber, 15 kilometers from the Iranian border. And for decades, people have suspected it might be something extraordinary. The problem is, between the Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf Wars, international sanctions, and ISIS, nobody could actually get there to find out. The ruins sat in a war zone for 40 years. But what archaeologists have now confirmed is that this site isn't just some random settlement. It's Alexandria on the Tigris, a massive planned city that Alexander the Great ordered, built in 324 BC, 1 year before he died. And according to the research team, for over 550 years, virtually everything traded between India and Mesopotamia passed through this single city: spices, exotic wood, semi-precious stones, probably silk from China, all of it funneled through one point. Now, the name Alexandria probably makes you think of Egypt, the famous library, Cleopatra, the lighthouse. But Alexander didn't just build one city. He founded roughly 20 across his empire, from Afghanistan to Tajikistan, and this one, the one at the head of the Persian Gulf, was designed to do something very specific. When Alexander ordered its construction, he'd just come off one of the worst stretches of his entire career. His admiral Nearchus had sailed the fleet through the Persian Gulf from India. Alexander himself had marched part of his army through the Gedrosian Desert, modern Balochistan, and suffered catastrophic losses to heat and starvation. When he regrouped, he discovered that southern Mesopotamia's harbors were choking on sediment. The Persian Gulf coastline was creeping south, making older ports useless. If Mesopotamia lost its connection to the sea, the whole economic engine of his empire stalled. So he ordered a brand new port city built at the mouth of the Tigris, right at the water's edge. He even named one quarter of the city Pella, after his hometown in Macedonia. He'd be dead within the year. The city was a trade chokepoint, the place where ocean-going ships from India met river barges heading north into the heart of Mesopotamia. Think of it as the ancient world's shipping container terminal. And the team at the University of Konstanz, led by Professor Stefan Hauser, is now calling it the eastern equivalent of Alexandria in Egypt. Same idea, different body of water, both cities built where open sea meets inland river systems, both designed as economic gateways linking entire continents. But before we get into what they actually found under the sand, you need to understand why this city was lost in the first place. Because it wasn't hidden. The fortification walls are still standing 8 meters tall. You can see them. They stretch for kilometers across the plain. This wasn't some buried secret. It was a giant ruin that nobody could safely reach. The first modern person to figure out what this place might be was a British researcher named John Hansman. In the 1960s, he was studying old Royal Air Force aerial photographs for his doctoral dissertation on Mesopotamian river changes. And in those images, he spotted these massive linear features, kilometers of walls enclosing what looked like an enormous settlement. He cross-referenced that with ancient descriptions from Pliny the Elder, and he said, "This has to be Charax Spasinou." That's the name the city eventually took after Alexander died. It was renamed multiple times, rebuilt multiple times, but it was fundamentally the same place. And then history got in the way. The Iran-Iraq War turned the entire region into a battlefield. A military camp was literally built inside the ancient city's ruins. For decades, the site was completely off limits. It wasn't until 2013 that a team of British archaeologists finally got in. And the way they got there tells you everything about the conditions. They drove 50 kilometers from Basra in a convoy of heavily armored vehicles, bumper to bumper, following strict security protocols. When they arrived, they found those 8-meter walls stretching across the landscape, and on the drive back, they agreed. This was Hansman's lost metropolis. Stefan Hauser joined the project in 2016, and even then, ISIS controlled large parts of northern Iraq and Syria. His team worked under armed guard. Traditional excavation, where you actually dig into the ground, was impossible. Too dangerous, too politically complicated, so they had to find another way. And this is where the technology becomes something special. They used three methods that together allowed them to map a buried city without removing a single brick. First, drones. Thousands of low-altitude aerial photographs processed through algorithms that stitch them into three-dimensional terrain models with centimeter-level resolution. On a flat alluvial plain, you'd never see the city's full layout from ground level. From above, the pattern emerges. Second, and this is the one that really changed everything, cesium magnetometers. These are instruments that exploit a quantum property of cesium atoms. You optically pump cesium-133 vapor to a specific energy state, and the way those atoms precess in the local magnetic field tells you, with insane precision, what's buried underneath you. We're talking Picat's law sensitivity, 100 times more precise than standard instruments. And different buried materials create different magnetic signatures. Fired brick, kiln ash, compacted earth, stone walls. They all distort Earth's magnetic field in slightly different ways, and the magnetometer picks it up from up to 3 meters underground. On Mesopotamian sites, this is incredibly effective because the primary building material is kiln-fired brick. When you fire a brick in a kiln, iron oxide minerals inside it lock in a magnetic orientation. That signature survives for thousands of years. So when you walk a magnetometer across the surface, the buried city literally announces itself. The team described the moment when the first magnetic images came through on their laptops and the unmistakable outline of a monumental building just appeared, the city emerging on a screen without anyone ever touching the ground. And the third method was simple but brutal: surface survey. Stuart Campbell organized a team that walked over 500 kilometers on foot across the city and its surroundings. Every pottery shard, every broken brick, every fragment of industrial debris, documented and mapped. Now, what did all of this actually reveal? This was not a rough frontier outpost. This was a meticulously planned urban center of a scale that's hard to wrap your head around. The magnetic images show a systematic grid of streets and residential blocks extending at least 2 kilometers south of the northern walls. All precisely aligned, all following the same master plan. The residential blocks measured about 161 by 88 meters. That makes them among the largest residential blocks known from any ancient city. Anywhere. Bigger than blocks in Seleucia, bigger than blocks in Alexandria in Egypt. And the city wasn't built all at once. 4 distinct grid orientations across the site tell the archaeologists there were at least 4 major construction phases spanning centuries. This place evolved, it was rebuilt, expanded, reorganized over and over again. They found functional zoning, a large residential core with several monumental temple complexes. Near an inner-city harbor connected to a canal system, they found clusters of workshops, kilns, and smelting furnaces. An entire industrial district, metalworking, manufacturing, and in a separate zone, a palatial complex standing in conspicuous isolation with no streets around it at all. Hauser suggested those empty areas might have been parks or vegetable gardens. Satellite imagery north of the city revealed a vast network of irrigation canals feeding agricultural fields, the food supply for a major urban population. Total estimated area? About 700 hectares. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 7 square kilometers. But the buildings are only half the story, because what this city actually did for 5.5 centuries is what makes it matter. Between roughly 300 BC and 300 AD, this was arguably the single most important commercial choke point in the ancient world. Everything coming by sea from India and beyond had to pass through here to reach the interior of Mesopotamia, and the markets upriver were enormous. The twin cities of Seleucia and Ctesiphon, which served as capitals for the Seleucid and then Parthian empires, had populations that ancient authors estimated at 400,000 to 600,000 people. That's a massive consumer market by any era's standards. And they wanted Indian spices, exotic timber, gemstones, and luxury goods from across the known world. Hauser puts it bluntly. All of the goods apparently passed through this city. Even after new ports were built farther south, Alexandria was still the place where everything got reloaded for transport upriver. And the evidence for this isn't just archaeological. Written sources back it up from multiple angles. A first-century Greek merchant's guide called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea describes the nearby harbor receiving large ships from India loaded with copper, sandalwood, teak, blackwood, and ebony. The city's most famous resident was a man named Isidore of Charax. He lived around the 1st century BC and AD, and he wrote what's essentially a road atlas of the Silk Road's Parthian section, describing the overland route from Antioch all the way to India. Some historians think Emperor Augustus himself commissioned that work for intelligence purposes. Merchants from Palmyra, the famous Syrian caravan city, maintained a permanent trading station at Charax. And this is a great stat. Of 30 known Palmyrene trade inscriptions that have survived from antiquity, 17 of them specifically mention Charax as their destination. More than half. It was the single most frequently named commercial destination in Palmyrene records. That's not speculation. That's carved in stone. Literally. Emperor Trajan visited in 116 AD during his Parthian campaign. And the story goes that when he saw ships setting sail for India, he said he wished he were young enough to follow Alexander's path eastward. Trajan, the emperor of Rome, standing on the docks of this city, watching ships leave for India and feeling envious. And then there's this. In 97 AD, a Chinese envoy named Gan Ying arrived at Charax. He was trying to reach Rome. He'd been sent by the Chinese general Ban Chao to make contact with the Roman Empire. But Parthian merchants at Charax talked him out of continuing. They told him the sea voyage west was too long, too dangerous, which was probably true, but also very convenient for the Parthians, who made enormous profits as middlemen and had zero interest in letting China and Rome establish a direct trade line. Think about that for a second. A Chinese diplomat stood in this city in southern Iraq 2,000 years ago, trying to reach Europe, and was turned back by local merchants protecting their business model. Ancient trade politics, ancient protectionism, ancient lobbying, basically. So when the Konstanz team says this city connected India, China, and Mesopotamia, they're not making that up. But it's worth being precise about what that means. The China connection was indirect. Goods like silk probably reached Charax through multiple intermediaries along the Silk Road. Nobody is claiming Chinese ships were pulling into the harbor. The evidence directly supports massive India trade and maritime commerce across the Persian Gulf. The China link is plausible and probably real, but it's a multi-step chain, not a direct route. Now, how did all of this end? And this might be the most fascinating part of the whole story. The same geological force that made the city necessary is exactly what killed it. Remember, Alexander built this city because older ports were getting choked by sedimentation. The Tigris and Euphrates dumped massive amounts of fine silt into the alluvial plain at the head of the Persian Gulf. Old harbors were filling up. The coastline was pushing south. Alexander's city was the fix. A brand new port, positioned right at the water's edge. But sedimentation didn't stop just because someone built a city. Pliny the Elder, writing around 65 AD, recorded this astonishing detail. The city had been founded about 2 kilometers from the open sea. By Pliny's time, 400 years later, it was already 180 kilometers from the Persian Gulf. The coastline was literally running away from the city, almost half a kilometer per year on average, over centuries. And it wasn't just the sea retreating. The Tigris itself shifted its course westward. At some point, the river just moved. And when your city is a port built on a river that no longer runs past it, your city is dead. Without river access, the economic rationale for the city's existence just dissolved. Hauser calls it exactly what it is. Alexandria was dependent on the river to serve its intended purpose. And then the river left. The decline was probably gradual, not a dramatic collapse. Trade volumes shrinking, population draining away, buildings falling into disrepair as the reason to be there slowly disappeared. Geological core samples taken by the team's collaborating scientists confirmed the city was largely abandoned by the 3rd century AD. And there's a deep irony here. The city was built as a solution to an environmental problem. Sedimentation was killing older ports, so Alexander built a new one, and then sedimentation killed that one too. The geological process he was trying to outrun was operating on a timescale that outlasts every empire, every city, every human plan. It's not even unique to this site. The Sumerian city of Ur was once a coastal port. It now sits 240 kilometers from the sea. The same story, different millennium. And there's a strange continuity to this. Basra, the nearest major city today, sitting about 40 kilometers to the south, directly inherited the geographic and commercial function of Alexander's city. Same role, same logic, different era. The geography demands a port there, and so humans keep building one over and over as the land pushes the coastline away. Now, I do want to be honest about what this research does and doesn't prove, because the headlines say confirmed and definitively identified, and the actual science is a bit more careful than that. The identification of Jebel Khayyaber as Alexandria on the Tigris rests on strong circumstantial evidence. The location matches ancient descriptions, the scale matches literary accounts, the fortification walls match what Pliny described. The grid plan is Hellenistic, which is consistent with an Alexander-era foundation. All of that points in the same direction, but there's no inscription that says "Welcome to Alexandria," no coin found in context with the city's name on it. The connection to Alexander specifically comes from ancient literary sources, not from something dug out of the ground at this site. Hauser himself, in his scholarly writing, phrases it carefully. He writes, "Provided that Pliny's report on the foundation by Alexander is correct," and then proceeds with the analysis. That conditional "provided" is doing a lot of work. It's the difference between "almost certainly this" and "proven beyond all doubt." The scholarship behind the media coverage was published as a book chapter in September 2025. The media wave in early 2026 was triggered by a university press release, not a new peer-reviewed journal article. And all of the expert commentary in the coverage comes from within the project team itself. No independent scholars have publicly weighed in yet. That doesn't mean the identification is wrong. It probably isn't. But it does mean the kind of rigorous external scrutiny you'd want hasn't fully happened yet. Also, of those 700 hectares of estimated city area, only about 150 hectares are well preserved enough for solid archaeological interpretation. Flooding has severely eroded the rest, so we're reading a book with a lot of pages missing. Future excavations are planned, funded by the Gerda Henkel Foundation, the German Research Foundation, and the British Council's Cultural Protection Fund. If they dig down into the earliest layers and find datable artifacts from the late 4th century BC, or better yet an inscription, the case becomes airtight. Right now, it's about 90% there, which in archaeology is actually very good, but it's not 100. Still, even at 90%, what we're looking at is remarkable. A city that functioned as the ancient world's main gateway between the Indian Ocean and Mesopotamia, where a Chinese envoy was turned away by merchants protecting their margins, where Roman emperors stood on the docks dreaming of India, where residential blocks were bigger than anything else in the ancient world, and all of it mapped by instruments sensitive enough to detect the magnetic memory of bricks that haven't seen daylight in over 2,000 years. The technology piece is maybe the quietest revolution here. We're entering an era where you can read a city underground the way you read a blueprint. No excavation, no destruction, just physics and patience. And if that works in southern Iraq, where war and politics have blocked traditional archaeology for decades, imagine what's waiting under every other conflict zone, every restricted border region, every patch of ground we've never been able to dig. The ancient world was more connected than most people realize, and the evidence has been sitting there this whole time. 8-meter walls in plain sight. We just couldn't get to it. And now that we can, the question isn't really whether this is Alexander's city. It almost certainly is. The question is what else is buried out there, in places we haven't looked yet, waiting for someone to walk across the surface with the right instrument at the right time. Want more of the latest science discoveries? There's always something waiting just under the surface.